The charity gala at the Four Seasons in Chicago was a sea of black ties and diamond chokers, celebrating the hospital's new wing. Lucas stood near the service entrance, holding his wife's coat, effectively invisible to the doctors who walked past him, doctors whose offices he cleaned every night. When he saw Rachel whisper something into the ear of the silver-haired investor, James, and share a laugh that was too intimate for a crowded room, the heavy coat in his arms suddenly felt like a burden he could no longer carry. If you've ever been the stepping stone for someone else to reach the stars, only to be kicked away when they got there, stay with me. The smell of Chicago in February was distinct. Wet wool, exhaust fumes, and the biting metallic scent of snow that hadn't fallen yet. But inside the penthouse apartment on the Gold Coast, the air smelled exclusively of expensive lilies and Chanel No. Lucas Bennett adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. It was a clip-on, cheap polyester, hidden under a suit jacket he'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were bruises from working the graveyard shift as a custodian at St. Jude's Hospital, followed by a 4-hour stint driving for Uber during the morning rush. He heard the laughter before he saw them. Rachel was in the living room, surrounded by her colleagues, fellow surgeons, anesthesiologists, the gods of the medical world. "Lucas, there you are," Rachel called out. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered like liquid mercury. She looked radiant, successful, and completely out of his league. Lucas walked in, forcing a smile. "Sorry, got held up with a project." Lucas is consulting for a logistics firm, Rachel said quickly to the tall man standing next to her. She didn't look at Lucas when she said it. It was the lie she had constructed for him, a shield to protect her reputation from the reality that her husband scrubbed toilets in the same building where she performed heart transplants. The tall man turned. It was James Sterling. Lucas knew him. Everyone knew him. He was the venture capitalist whose name was on the new hospital wing. "Logistics," James said, his voice smooth, like aged whiskey. He looked Lucas up and down, his eyes lingering on the frayed cuff of Lucas's jacket. "Fascinating work, I'm sure. It pays the bills," Lucas said, his voice tight. Speaking of bills, James turned back to Rachel, effectively dismissing Lucas. "The board is thrilled with your numbers this quarter, Rachel. You're becoming indispensable." Lucas walked to the kitchen to get a drink, his hands shaking slightly. He watched them from the doorway. He saw the way James leaned in close to whisper something to Rachel. He saw the way Rachel threw her head back and laughed, her hand resting lightly, comfortably, on James's forearm. It wasn't the touch of a colleague. It was the touch of a woman who knew the texture of the man's skin. The dinner party dragged on for 2 more hours. Lucas played his part, the quiet, supportive husband who refilled glasses and cleared plates, blending into the background like he did on his night shifts. When the last guest finally left, the silence in the apartment was deafening. Rachel kicked off her heels and sighed, dropping onto the white leather sofa. "You were quiet tonight," she said, scrolling through her phone. "I was tired, Rachel. I worked a double yesterday, so I could afford the dry cleaning for this suit," Lucas said, loosening the tie. "And I saw you." Rachel stopped scrolling. "Saw me what?" "With James. You looked happy." Rachel stood up, her expression hardening. "Don't start, Lucas. James is an investor. He's important to my career. Something you wouldn't understand." "I understand plenty," Lucas said, his voice rising. "I understand that I'm scrubbing floors to pay off your loans while you flirt with a billionaire in our living room. I understand that you introduce me as a consultant because you're ashamed of me. I introduce you as a consultant because the truth is embarrassing." Rachel shouted, the veneer of the perfect doctor cracking. "Do you think I want to tell the chief of surgery that my husband is the guy who empties the biohazard bins? I took that job for you." Lucas stepped forward, the hurt exploding in his chest. "I dropped out of med school for you, so you could study, so you could be this. And maybe that was your mistake," Rachel said coldly. She walked over to the window, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. "I've outgrown this, Lucas. I've outgrown us." "What are you saying?" I'm saying James asked me to go to Aspen this weekend. And I'm going. The air left the room. Lucas felt like he'd been punched. You're sleeping with him. Rachel turned around. She didn't deny it. There was no guilt in her eyes, only a terrifying resolve. He challenges me. He matches me. When I'm with him, I feel like I'm at the top of the world. When I come home to you, I just smell bleach. I am your husband, Lucas whispered. Not anymore, Rachel said. She pointed to the door. I want you to leave. It's 11 p.m. It's 10 degrees outside. This is my apartment too. Rachel laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I pay the rent now, Lucas. You can barely cover the utilities. I'm done pretending. I'm done lowering myself. She looked him dead in the eye, her face a mask of beautiful cruelty. Honestly, Lucas, I'd rather sleep on the floor than sleep with you one more night. Get out. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, and realized the woman he had sacrificed his future for was gone. In her place was a stranger in a silver dress. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't scream. He simply took his coat from the rack, opened the door, and walked out into the freezing hallway. As he stepped out of the building, the Chicago wind hit him like a physical blow, cutting through his thin jacket. He was alone, broke, and shivering. But as he looked up at the penthouse window one last time, he didn't feel only pain. He felt the heavy, crushing weight of her ambition lift off his shoulders. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow, it screamed. It tore through the alleyways of the loop, rattling the metal trash cans and stinging any exposed skin with the ferocity of 1,000 needles. Lucas sat in the driver's seat of his 2014 Honda Civic, parked in the far corner of a 24-hour grocery store parking lot. The engine was off to save gas. The temperature dashboard read 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the car, it wasn't much warmer. His breath hung in the air, a white ghost that appeared and vanished with every rhythmic exhale. He stared at the steering wheel. This car was his office, his secondary income, and now, apparently, his home. The irony was suffocating. He had spent the last 4 years paying for Rachel's student loans, her wardrobe, the lease on the penthouse, and the membership at the Equinox gym she insisted was vital for networking. He had poured every cent of his janitorial and driving wages into the vessel of her ambition, leaving his own hull completely hollow. He checked his bank account on his phone. That had to last him. He didn't even know how long. Rent in Chicago required a first and last month's deposit plus a credit check. His credit was shot from the credit cards he'd maxed out to pay for her medical board exams. His thumb hovered over Rachel's contact. The urge to call her, to beg, to ask if she really meant it, was a physical ache in his chest. I'd rather sleep on the floor than sleep with you. The words replayed in his mind, sharp and high definition. He didn't call. Instead, he opened Instagram. It was a masochistic impulse, picking at a fresh wound. There it was. A story posted 20 minutes ago. It wasn't Rachel's account. It was James Sterling's. The photo was taken inside a private jet. A flute of champagne rested on a leather table, and in the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was Rachel. She was looking out the window, her profile soft, smiling at something the camera couldn't see. The caption read, "Aspenbound. Escaping the noise." The noise. That's what Lucas was to them. Static. Background interference. Lucas turned off the phone and threw it onto the passenger seat. The darkness of the car felt heavier now. The cold began to seep through his thrift store suit jacket, settling into his bones. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering violently. He couldn't stay here. The cold would kill him, or at least numb him until he couldn't work his shift tomorrow. And if he missed a shift at St. Jude's, he lost the job. If he lost the job, he lost the car. He turned the key. The engine sputtered, groaned, and then roared to life. He blasted the heat, letting the warm air hit his frozen fingers. He drove. He didn't know where he was going, just that he had to move. He found himself driving toward the hospital. It was a gravitational pull he couldn't resist. St. Jude's Medical Center rose like a fortress of glass and steel against the black sky. It was a place of healing for the wealthy, and a place of servitude for him. He pulled into the employee lot, the one reserved for maintenance and custodial staff, located a half-mile from the main entrance. He parked between a rusted pickup truck and a dumpster. Lucas reclined the seat. He reached into the back, grabbing an old blanket he kept for passengers who complained about the cold. It smelled of stale perfume and dust. He pulled it over his head. Closing his eyes, he tried to sleep, but the image of the champagne glass and Rachel's smile burned behind his eyelids. He realized then that the betrayal wasn't that she stopped loving him. People fall out of love. The betrayal was that she had used him as fuel, burned him up to reach her altitude, and then dropped the ash without a second glance. "Okay," he whispered to the empty car. The sound was small, pathetic. He sat up. The despair was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it, something else was hardening. A cold, sharp resolve, matching the temperature outside. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a driver. He was the man who had memorized Grey's Anatomy by flashlight while she slept. He was the man who fixed the things everyone else ignored. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, battered notebook. He clicked a pen. In the dim light of a street lamp filtering through the windshield, he wrote down a single line. Day 1. Balance, $142. Objective, survive. He stared at the hospital looming above him. Tomorrow, he would scrub its floors. But tonight, he would study it. He would find the cracks in their perfect walls that only a janitor could see. Underscore. St. Jude's Hospital at 3 a.m. was a mechanical beast that never truly slept. It only changed its rhythm. The frantic energy of the daytime shifts settled into the low, humming vibration of life support machines and the squeak of rubber saws on linoleum. Lucas Bennett was in the bowels of the beast, the loading dock on the sub-basement level. The air down here was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust from the idling disposal trucks and the faint, sickly sweet odor of medical decay. He adjusted his grip on the heavy canvas cart. His job tonight was waste stream management, a sanitized corporate term for dragging heavy bags of trash from the surgical suites to the compactor. His back ached with a dull, persistent throb, a physical reminder of the car seat he had slept in for the last 3 nights. "Hurry it up, Bennett," the dock foreman, a man named Kowalski who chewed unlit cigars, barked from the booth. "The Stericycle trucks are on a schedule. They don't wait for dreamers." Lucas didn't answer. He pushed the cart toward the weighing station. He lifted a heavy red bag, marked with the universal biohazard symbol, and tossed it onto the scale. 42 pounds. He grabbed the clipboard hanging by the scale to log the weight. That was the procedure. Weigh, log, load. But as his pen hovered over the paper, Lucas paused. He looked at the bag. It was translucent enough to see the contents pressed against the red plastic. Inside, he saw the usual, bloody gauze, tubing, saline bags. But he also saw something else. A stack of heavy cardboard Starbucks trays, a thick bundle of pristine printer paper, and what looked like a shattered glass vase. He frowned. He looked at the manifest from the previous pickup. Surgical Unit 4, Cardio/Thoracic, Biohazard Waste, 850 pounds. Rate, $12. 50/pound. Lucas's mind, dormant for so long under layers of exhaustion and self-pity, suddenly clicked into gear. He did the math instantly. 50 per pound for biohazardous incineration. Regular waste, the clear bags, cost the hospital $0. 0.8 per pound to send to a landfill. He looked around. The dock was empty except for the driver smoking a cigarette by the bay door. Lucas pulled a pocket knife from his belt, a violation of hospital policy, and made a small, precise slit in the red bag. He pulled out the stack of papers. They weren't patient files. They were old magazines and takeout menus from the nurse's station. He pulled out the shattered vase. It was just a heavy glass water pitcher that someone had dropped and didn't want to clean up properly. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Lucas jumped. The driver was watching him, flicking his cigarette but into the snow. "Just checking for sharps." Lucas lied. his heart hammering against his ribs. Safety protocol. The driver laughed, a rough, hacking sound. Nobody checks. The hospital pays, we burn it. It all turns to ash anyway, kid. Throw it in the truck. Lucas taped the bag shut and tossed it in. As the truck rumbled away, Lucas retreated to the corner of the dock, out of the foreman's sight. He pulled out his battered notebook. He had spent 4 years listening to Rachel complain about hospital budget cuts. She had ranted endlessly about how the board refused to buy new MRI machines because operational costs were too high. She had blamed the insurance companies. She had blamed the government. But she was wrong. Lucas watched the next cart come down from the plastic surgery wing, Rachel's wing. He watched the porter throw 6 red bags onto the scale. He didn't need to open them to know what was inside. Laziness. Arrogance. The surgeons and nurses, the gods of the hospital, couldn't be bothered to separate their trash. They were throwing their coffee cups and office paper into the biohazard bins because the red bins were closer to the operating tables than the gray ones. Lucas did a quick calculation in his notebook. Daily waste overlap, approximate. Daily loss per wing, $4,000. Annual loss for the entire hospital. The number he circled was staggering. $3 million a year. $3 million literally being burned because highly educated people were too arrogant to sort their own garbage. Lucas looked up at the ceiling, imagining Rachel 3 floors above him. She was likely sleeping in the on-call room, or maybe she was texting James about their next ski trip, complaining about how tight the department budget was. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't the crushing weight of heartbreak anymore. It was the adrenaline of discovery. He wasn't just looking at trash. He was looking at his capital. He took his phone out. He had 8% battery left. He snapped a photo of the manifest. Then he snapped a photo of the mixed waste inside the next red bag. "Bennett," Kowalski shouted. "Break's over. The ER is flooding with trauma. Get up there." Lucas pocketed the notebook. He stood up straight, wiping the grime from his hands onto his pants. For the first time since Rachel had kicked him out, he didn't feel like a ghost haunting the halls. He felt like a hunter who had just found the tracks of a very large, very wounded animal. "Coming," Lucas said. He walked toward the service elevator, not with the shuffle of a defeated man, but with the focused stride of someone who had a plan. He needed data. He needed proof. And he had access to every trash can in the building. The floor was his now, and he was going to own it. Understood. Underscore 3 years. Time didn't heal wounds. It just built scar tissue over them, thick, tough, and devoid of sensation. Lucas Bennett had learned that while the Chicago winters were cold, the indifference of a bank loan officer was colder. He sat in the waiting room of Mercy General's administrative wing. He wasn't wearing the thrift store jacket anymore. He wore a navy suit, tailored to fit a frame that had leaned out and hardened from eating cheap tuna and running miles along the lakefront at 4 a.m. It wasn't an Armani, but it was pressed sharp enough to cut. He checked his reflection in his phone screen. The stubble was gone. His hair was short, military precision. The eyes that stared back were no longer the wide, wet eyes of the husband left on the sidewalk. They were dry, calculating, and patient. "Mr. Bennett, the CFO will see you now." Lucas stood up, picking up his leather portfolio. He walked into the office of Alan Vance, a man known for cutting hospital budgets with a machete. Vance didn't stand up to shake hands. He was reading a file, looking bored. "You have 5 minutes. My secretary said you have a way to save us 6 figures. I'm listening." Lucas didn't sit. He walked to the desk and placed a single sheet of paper in front of Vance. It wasn't a business plan. It was a photograph, the one he had taken 3 years ago on the loading dock of St. Jude's. "That," Lucas said, his voice steady, "is a bag of biohazardous waste from your competitor, St. Jude's. They paid $12 to incinerate it." Vance glanced at the photo, then at Lucas. And inside that bag," Lucas continued, placing a second photo on the desk, "is 5 pounds of office paper, 3 Starbucks cups, and a plastic flower pot. That's not biohazard. That's municipal trash. St. Jude's burns about 2 tons of this misclassified waste a week. They are literally burning money. Vance stopped tapping his pen. He looked at the photo, then at Lucas. How do you know this? Because I used to weigh it, Lucas said. He didn't hide it. He owned it. I worked the docks. I know the flow of this hospital better than your chief of medicine knows the arteries of the heart. Your surgeons are brilliant, Mr. Vance, but they are lazy with their trash. And your current waste management vendor charges you by the pound, so they have no incentive to correct you. Lucas leaned in, placing his hands on the mahogany desk. My company, Bennett Solutions, doesn't just haul. We audit. We train your staff. We redesign your bin placement. We employ sensors to track waste stream purity. I don't charge you for the haul. I charge you a percentage of what I save you. Vance leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He studied Lucas with a new expression, curiosity. You want a cut of the savings? I guarantee a 40% reduction in your incineration costs in the first quarter, Lucas said. If I don't hit the number, you don't pay me a dime. If I do, I take half the savings for the first 2 years. The room went silent. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to grow louder. Vance looked at the numbers on Lucas's sheet. He did the mental math. 40% of their waste budget was millions over a decade. And why come to Mercy? Vance asked. Why not go back to St. Jude's? Lucas's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened imperceptibly. St. Jude's has systemic culture issues I prefer not to engage with. Vance smirked. He liked sharks. He recognized one in the water. You're a gamble, Bennett. You have no fleet, no track record. I have the data, Lucas countered. And I'm the only one in this city who is willing to sort through the blood to find the gold. Vance stared at him for a long 10 seconds. Then he picked up his pen. Draft the contract. But if you miss the target by even 1%, I'll bury you. I won't miss, Lucas said. He walked out of the hospital 20 minutes later. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the pavement. He walked to his car, a newer model now, a modest sedan, but clean. He sat in the driver's seat and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released 3 years of tension. He had done it. He had his first major client. He pulled out his phone. He had a notification from LinkedIn. The algorithm suggested a connection. Dr. Rachel Bennett, Chief of Plastic Surgery, St. Jude's Medical Center. He clicked on her profile. She looked perfect in her headshot, airbrushed, glowing, untouchable. Her latest post was about the art of perfection. Lucas looked at his own hand. There was a small scar on his thumb from where a needle had grazed him in the trash bags years ago. He locked the phone screen. Perfection is expensive, Rachel, he whispered to the dark car. And I'm about to send you the bill. He started the engine. He didn't drive home to a cold apartment. He drove to the office. There was work to do. The grind wasn't over. It was just beginning. Underscore. The diamond bracelet on Rachel's wrist was heavy. It was a gift from James for their 3rd anniversary. A stunning loop of platinum and paved set stones that cost more than Lucas used to make in a year. But as Rachel sat at the vanity table, trying to clasp it with trembling fingers, it felt less like jewelry and more like a shackle. You're taking too long, Rachel. James's voice drifted in from the hallway. The car has been idling for 10 minutes. Almost ready, she replied, her voice automatic, trained to be soothing. She looked at herself in the mirror. At 34, Dr. Rachel Bennett was the face of St. Jude's plastic surgery department. Her skin was flawless, maintained by the very procedures she sold. Her hair was a perfect cascade of blonde waves. But the eyes staring back were dull, rimmed with a fatigue that no filler could plump away. She walked out into the living room. James was pacing, tapping furiously on his phone. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't tell her she looked beautiful. He didn't notice the dress she had spent hours choosing. Let's go, he said, pocketing the device. The board is nervous about the quarterly projections. I need to charm the donors tonight. So please, just smile and don't talk shop. Nobody wants to hear about skin grafts while they're eating Wagyu. Rachel felt a sharp sting of humiliation. I performed a 6-hour facial reconstruction on a burn victim today, James. It was incredible work. James opened the door, ushering her out. I know, darling. You're a very talented mechanic. But tonight, be a wife. The charity auction was held at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was the same crowd as always, the same fake smiles, the same air kisses, the same conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons and tax loopholes. Rachel stood by James's side, a silent statue in designer silk. He held court with 3 other investors, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny. His hand rested on the small of her back, not in affection, but in possession, a firm, guiding grip that told her exactly where to stand. Her mind drifted back 5 years. She remembered coming home exhausted from her residency, smelling of antiseptic. Lucas would be there. He would take her bag. He would sit her down on their lumpy thrift store couch and massage the arches of her feet until she fell asleep. He never told her not to talk shop. He used to ask, "How did the sutures hold? Did you use the vertical mattress stitch?" He had cared about her mind, not just her aesthetic. Earth to Rachel, a woman's voice snapped her back. It was Claire, the wife of a hospital board member. She was holding a martini and looking at Rachel with a mixture of envy and malice. "I was just saying, have you heard the rumors about the new logistics contract?" Claire asked. "St. Jude's is bleeding money, and Mercy General is suddenly posting record profits. My husband is furious." "I don't really follow the administrative side," Rachel said politely. "Oh, you should." Claire lowered her voice, her eyes gleaming. "Apparently, Mercy hired some ghost firm. Bennett Solutions or something. They say the CEO is a genius. Cut their waste costs in half in 6 months." Rachel froze. The champagne flute in her hand tilted dangerously. "Bennett?" she whispered. "Common name, I know," Claire shrugged. "But the rumor is he's local. A real shark. My husband tried to get a meeting with him, but he refuses to work with St. Jude's. Personal vendetta, maybe?" Rachel felt the room spin. Bennett Solutions. It couldn't be. Lucas was a janitor. He was a driver. He was the man she had left standing in the snow with a duffel bag. There was no way he could be the shark Mercy General was boasting about. But the memory of that night clawed at her throat. "I'd rather sleep on the floor." "Rachel." James nudged her, harder this time. "Stop daydreaming. The senator is asking you a question." Rachel blinked, looking up at the senator who was waiting for a laugh. She forced the corners of her mouth up, the muscle memory of the perfect wife kicking in. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice brittle. "I was just thinking about the past." "Well, don't," James muttered in her ear, his breath smelling of scotch. "Focus on the future. I'm trying to close a deal here." Later that night, back in the penthouse that overlooked the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, James fell asleep instantly, snoring softly. Rachel lay awake on the 1,000 thread count sheets. The room was temperature controlled to a perfect 68 degrees, yet she was freezing. She turned on her side, pulling the duvet up to her chin. The bed was massive, a king-sized island, and the distance between her and James felt like an ocean. She had the status she wanted. She had the wealth. She had the man who matched her. But as she stared into the darkness, the only thing she could think about was a phantom name whispered at a party. Bennett Solutions. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and typed the name into the search bar. A headline popped up from Crane's Chicago Business. "The Invisible Empire. How Lucas Bennett Turned Medical Waste into Gold." There was no photo of him, just a silhouette of a building and a graph showing a vertical climb. Rachel dropped the phone onto the mattress as if it had burned her. A tear, hot and heavy, slid down her temple and vanished into the expensive pillow. She had kicked him down to the bottom, thinking he would stay there. She hadn't realized that the bottom was the foundation, and he had been building a skyscraper while she was just decorating a glass house. The morning sun over Chicago usually signaled the start of the rush hour grind. But today, it illuminated a crime scene. Or rather, a scene of gross negligence that the local news was calling the Red Bag Scandal. St. Jude's Hospital was under siege. Not by bacteria or a virus, but by reporters. 3 vans were parked on the sidewalk, their satellite dishes pointed like accusations at the glass facade. Inside the executive boardroom on the top floor, the atmosphere was toxic. The air conditioning was blasting, but the men in suits were sweating. How did this happen? James Sterling slammed his hand on the mahogany table, making the water pitchers jump. I poured $40 million into this wing, and now CNN is reporting that our medical waste was found in a municipal landfill in Gary, Indiana. Needles, blood bags. The chief of operations, a balding man named Henderson, wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. It was the vendor, James. BioSafe hauling. They cut corners. They claimed they were incinerating, but they were dumping. I don't care about the vendor, James roared, pacing the length of the room. I care about the EPA agents currently seizing our records downstairs. I care about the fact that the Department of Health just threatened to suspend our surgical license. Do you know what that does to my stock portfolio? Rachel sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt nauseous. She looked out the window at the chaos below. It was a disaster, yes, but for her, it was something far worse. It was a reckoning. She remembered Lucas, years ago, complaining about the loading dock. They don't check, Rachel. They just throw it in the truck. It's a ticking time bomb. She had laughed at him then. She had told him to stop boring her with janitorial gossip. We need a fix, the chairman of the board interrupted, his voice cutting through James's shouting. We need to demonstrate immediate, verifiable compliance. We need a complete audit of our waste stream logistics, retroactive to last year, and we need it started within 48 hours, or they shut us down. So hire someone, James snapped. Get the best. I don't care what it costs. There is only one firm in the Midwest with the software and the manpower to handle a crisis of this scale in that time frame, Henderson said, sliding a blue folder across the table. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She stared at the folder. She knew what was printed on the cover before she even read it. Bennett Solutions, Henderson said. The name hung in the air like smoke. I've heard of them, James said, stopping his pacing. They turned Mercy General around. But I heard the CEO is difficult, arrogant. He's effective, the chairman said. I spoke to their VP of operations this morning. They are willing to take the contract, but their CEO insists on leading the transition personally. Fine. James waved his hand dismissively. Get him in here. Tomorrow morning. We sign the check. He cleans the mess. We save the license. Rachel felt the room shrinking. She had to say something. She had to stop this. But what could she say? You can't hire him because 5 years ago I told him he smelled like bleach and threw him out into the snow? Is there anyone else? Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly. James turned to her, his eyes cold and impatient. Rachel, this is a business crisis, not a social calendar issue. We don't have time to shop around. Unless you have a degree in hazardous waste logistics you've been hiding? The sarcasm in his voice silenced her. He didn't know. To James, Bennett was just a common surname. He had never bothered to learn Lucas's last name when they met at the apartment. To him, Lucas was just the ex and non-entity. No, Rachel whispered, looking down at her manicured nails. I don't. Then it's settled, the chairman said. I'll set the meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. We need the surgical chief present, Rachel. That means you. He'll need access to your protocols. Rachel nodded, feeling the trap snap shut. The meeting adjourned, and the executives filed out, already on their phones doing damage control. James didn't wait for her. He stormed out to deal with his PR team. Rachel remained in her chair, alone in the vast, cold boardroom. She looked at the blue folder on the table. She reached out and opened it. The first page wasn't a proposal. It was a mission statement. Efficiency is the absence of lies. She closed the folder. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She stood up and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Tomorrow, the ghost she had created was walking through the front door. And unlike the night she kicked him out, this time, he wasn't carrying a duffel bag. He was holding the keys to her entire world. The clock on the boardroom wall ticked over to 8:59 a.m. The second hand moved with a mechanical precision that seemed to mock the erratic heartbeats of the people sitting around the mahogany table. James Sterling drummed his fingers on the polished wood. He checked his Rolex for the third time in a minute. He's late. This is a power play. I hate vendors who think they can play games. He's not late, James, Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper. She was staring at the double doors at the far end of the room, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. He's never late. James frowned at her. How would you know? Before Rachel could answer, before she could invent a lie, the heavy oak doors swung open. There were no assistants scuttling in first. No nervous PR reps. Just one man. Lucas Bennett walked into the room. The air seemed to leave the space. Rachel stopped breathing. She remembered the man she had kicked out. Slumped shoulders, smelling of industrial cleaner, wearing a thrift store jacket that was 2 sizes too big. The man walking toward them was a stranger. He wore a charcoal suit that was cut to perfection, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. His shirt was crisp, white, and stiff. He didn't carry a briefcase. He carried nothing. He walked with a predator's grace, quiet, confident, and utterly lethal. He didn't look at the chairman. He didn't look at James. He stopped at the head of the table, the spot usually reserved for the CEO of St. Jude's, and placed his hands on the back of the empty chair. "Good morning," Lucas said. His voice was deeper than Rachel remembered, stripped of any warmth, resonant and commanding. The chairman cleared his throat, standing up to offer a hand. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming on such short notice." I know who you are." Lucas cut him off gently but firmly. He didn't take the handshake. Instead, he pulled the chair out and sat down. James bristled. "Now listen here, Bennett. We're hiring you to fix a plumbing issue, not to take over the meeting. I'm James Sterling, the primary investor here," and Lucas turned his head slowly to look at James. The movement was so deliberate it felt like a weapon. He looked at James with eyes that were cold, dark, and terrifyingly empty of recognition. "I know who you are too, Mr. Sterling," Lucas said. "You're the man who cut the waste management budget by 15% 4 years ago to inflate the quarterly dividends. You're the reason the EPA is currently seizing your hard drives." James's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was used to being the smartest, richest man in the room. Suddenly, he looked like a schoolboy being scolded by the principal. "We are here to discuss the contract," Lucas continued, opening a leather folder he had pulled from his inside pocket. "My team has already assessed your situation. It's worse than the news is reporting. You have biohazardous leakage in 3 counties. The fines alone will bankrupt this hospital in 6 months. That's why we called you," the chairman said, sweating. "We need your logistics network to scrub the chain of custody. Immediately." "We can do that," Lucas said. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Here are my terms." James snatched the paper. His eyes widened. "This is extortion. You're asking for full operational control of the back end and 50% of the projected savings, plus a retainer that's double the industry standard? Those are the terms for a rescue mission," Lucas said calmly. "If you want a standard service, call Waste Management." "Oh wait, you can't. They blacklisted you this morning." James turned red. He looked at Rachel, desperate for an ally. "Rachel, say something. You're the chief of surgery. Tell him this is unreasonable. Tell him we can't hand over control of your department's protocols to an outsider." Lucas shifted his gaze. For the first time in 5 years, he looked directly at Rachel. Rachel felt the floor drop out from under her. She waited for the anger. She waited for the smirk. She waited for him to say, "Hello, wife." But there was nothing. No spark. No hate. No love. He looked at her the way a surgeon looks at a cold instrument. "Dr. Bennett," Lucas said. The name sounded foreign on his tongue. "Mr. Sterling seems to think my terms will interfere with your work. Do you agree?" Rachel tried to speak. Her throat was dry as dust. She looked at the man she had thrown away because he wasn't enough for her. Now, he owned the room, He owned the negotiation, and in a few minutes, he would effectively own the hospital. No, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. The terms are acceptable. Rachel, James snapped. Whose side are you on? The side that keeps this hospital open, Lucas interjected, his voice sharp. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. You have 1 hour to sign. If you don't, my team walks, and the state pulls your license by Friday. He turned to leave, dismissing them as if they were the help. Wait. James stood up, his ego unable to take the bruising. You think you can just waltz in here and dictate terms to us? Who do you think you are? Lucas stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. I'm the guy who cleans up the mess, Lucas said. The one you didn't think was worth noticing. He walked out. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving a silence so profound that Rachel could hear the sound of her own life shattering. James slumped back into his chair, defeated. Arrogant prick. Who does he think he is? Rachel stared at the closed door, tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. He thinks he's the man who won, she whispered to herself. The contract was signed in ink, but the atmosphere in the room suggested it had been signed in blood. By noon, the executive conference room, once the sanctuary of the board, had been transformed into a command center. Lucas's team had arrived with the efficiency of a SWAT team. They replaced the fruit baskets with laptops, the water pitchers with schematics, and the silence with the rapid-fire click of keyboards. Rachel stood by the door, clutching a patient file she didn't need. She couldn't leave. She was the chief of surgery. Her presence was technically required to authorize access to the restricted zones. But in reality, she was a ghost haunting her own workplace. She watched Lucas. He had removed his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt to his elbows. It was a small detail, but it hit her with the force of a physical blow. His forearms were thicker than she remembered, corded with muscle. On his left wrist, where he used to wear a cheap Timex, sat a Patek Philippe. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He didn't look like a driver. He looked like the architect of a war she was losing. This is ridiculous, James muttered, standing beside her. He was pacing, his tie loosened, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and impotence. He's treating my hospital like a conquered territory. I should have fired him the second he walked in. You couldn't, Rachel said, her voice flat. We need him. I don't need anyone. James snapped, turning on her. And why are you staring at him? Do you find this amusement park logistics routine impressive? I find competence impressive, James, she shot back, the frustration finally leaking out. Something I haven't seen from the board in months. James's eyes narrowed. Careful, Rachel. You're talking to the man who bought your title. Before she could respond, Lucas walked over. He didn't acknowledge their bickering. He didn't even look at James. He stopped 2 feet from Rachel, holding a tablet. Dr. Bennett, he said. His voice was cool, professional, and devoid of intimacy. My team has flagged an anomaly in the ore waste disposal chutes. It seems the incinerator bypass valve has been stuck open for 3 years. Since you run the department, I need you to sign off on the shutdown for repairs. Rachel looked up at him. She searched his eyes for a flicker, anger, hurt, anything. But they were like the surface of a frozen lake. 3 years, she asked, her voice trembling. That corresponds to when we switched vendors. Correct, Lucas said. It seems your previous cost-saving measures involved disabling the safety filters to process trash faster. It saved you money, but it poisoned the groundwater. He held out the stylus. Rachel's hand shook as she took it. Her fingers brushed against his. She felt a jolt of electricity run up her arm, a familiar spark that made her breath hitch. She looked at him, pleading silently. Lucas, it's me. It's Rachel, the woman you used to make coffee for. Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He simply waited for her to sign, as if she were just another bureaucratic hurdle. Thank you, he said when she finished. He took the tablet back. Lucas, she whispered, low enough that James couldn't hear over the noise of the room. Can we talk? Privately? He paused. For a second, she thought she saw a crack in the armor. Regarding the audit? He asked. No, she said, her eyes filling with tears. Regarding us. Lucas looked at her. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying a specimen under a microscope. There is no us in this contract, doctor, he said. There is only the client and the vendor. And right now, the client is wasting my time. He turned and walked back to the head of the table, where his team was waiting. Rachel stood there, frozen. The rejection wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was a dismissal. It was the realization that to him, she wasn't the love of his life anymore. She wasn't even an enemy. She was just an inefficiency. James grabbed her elbow, his grip painful. What did you say to him? Nothing, Rachel whispered, pulling her arm away. Good, James hissed. Because I'm going to dig into this guy. Nobody comes out of nowhere with this kind of leverage. I'm going to find his dirt, and when I do, I'm going to bury him. Rachel looked at her husband, the man she had chosen for his power, and then at Lucas, the man she had discarded for his poverty. Don't bother, James, she said, feeling a new, terrible clarity. Why? Because, Rachel said, watching Lucas command the room without raising his voice. I think he's already buried us. Underscore. The crisis management lasted 48 hours. For 2 days, the executive floor of St. Jude's smelled of stale coffee, overheated electronics, and fear. Lucas Bennett hadn't slept. He stood by the whiteboard, which was now covered in a complex web of logistics flows, vendor nodes, and cost-benefit equations. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his mind was evidently razor-sharp. He capped the marker with a decisive click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. It's done, Lucas said, his voice raspy. The waste stream has been rerouted to compliant facilities. The EPA has received the preliminary manifest. Your license is safe. A collective sigh went through the room. The junior analysts on Lucas's team slumped in their chairs. Even the chairman of the board looked like he might cry with relief. But James Sterling didn't look relieved. He looked cornered. He had spent the last 2 days drinking scotch in his office, emerging only to glare at Lucas through the glass walls. Now, he stormed into the room, holding a sheaf of papers. Safe. James barked, his slur slight but noticeable. You think you're the hero, Bennett? I've been making calls. I know about your aggressive takeover of Mercy General's contracts. This isn't a rescue. It's a raid. James, stop, Rachel said from the corner of the room. She was sitting on a folding chair, looking pale and ghostly. He saved the hospital. It's over. It's not over until I say it is. James slammed the papers onto the conference table. I'm terminating your contract immediately, Bennett. You're fired. Get your people out of my building before I call security. The room went dead silent. The chairman stood up, alarmed. James, you can't do that. We haven't paid him the... I said get out. James shouted, his face purple. Lucas didn't move. He didn't blink. He looked at James with a profound, exhausting pity. He slowly reached for his leather portfolio and pulled out a single, red-tabbed folder. I expected you to try this, Lucas said softly. Men like you always try to burn the house down when you realize you don't own the deed anymore. What is that? James narrowed his eyes. This, Lucas tapped the folder, is the reason your waste valves were stuck open, Mr. Sterling. It wasn't just negligence. It was architecture. Lucas opened the folder. He didn't look at the papers. He knew them by heart. For 3 years, St. Jude's paid a premium rate to BioSafe hauling. But BioSafe didn't incinerate the waste. They dumped it in a landfill for pennies on the dollar. The difference in cost, about $2 million a year, was funneled into a shell company called Sterling Holdings LLC. Rachel gasped. The sound was small, sharp, and horrified. James froze. The color drained from his face instantly, leaving him looking gray and old. That's a lie, James whispered, but his voice lacked any conviction. It's in the ledger, James, Lucas said, looking directly at him. I trace waste. That means I trace every pound, every mile, and every dollar. You weren't just investing in the hospital. You were looting it. Lucas closed the folder. Now, here is the situation. I have fulfilled my contract. You owe my company $4 million in emergency service fees. You will wire that money by 9 a.m. He paused, letting the silence crush the air out of the room. If the money is there, I walk away. This report stays in my vault, and you can deal with your board internally. If the money isn't there, I send this to the FBI. James slumped against the wall, his legs giving out. He looked at the chairman, who was staring at him with undisguised disgust. He looked at the staff. And finally, he looked at Rachel. Rachel stood up. She walked over to the table and looked down at the red folder. The evidence of her husband's corruption. The man she had left Lucas for, because he was successful, because he was ambitious. He was nothing but a thief in a suit. She looked at Lucas. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smiling. He was simply doing the job, cleaning up the mess. Lucas, Rachel whispered. The wire transfer details are on the invoice, Lucas said, turning his back on her to pack his bag. My team is leaving. Good luck, gentlemen. He signaled to his staff. In a flurry of movement, laptops were closed, cables coiled, and within 2 minutes, the room was empty of everyone except the St. Jude's executives. Lucas walked out the door without looking back. Rachel watched him go. She looked at James, who was trembling, wiping sweat from his upper lip. The room was saved, the hospital was open, but the stench in the air wasn't medical waste anymore. It was the rot of her own life. She realized then that she was standing in a room full of millionaires, and she had never felt poorer. Understood. The boardroom doors swung shut, sealing James Sterling and his ruin inside with the wolves of the hospital board. Rachel didn't stay to watch the feeding frenzy. She turned and ran. She ran past the bewildered secretaries, past the portraits of past chiefs of surgery, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floors. For the first time in her career, Dr. Rachel Bennett didn't care about composure. She didn't care that her mascara was likely smudged or that she was hyperventilating. She had to catch him. She reached the elevator bank just as the brass doors were sliding shut. She jammed her hand into the gap, the safety sensor triggering a retraction. Lucas was inside alone. He looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. He didn't look surprised to see her. He barely looked interested. Going down? He asked, his voice devoid of mockery. Rachel stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors closed, trapping them in a box of mirrors and polished steel. The silence was suffocating. It smelled of his cologne, something expensive, woodsy, and cold. It smelled nothing like the bleach and sweat she remembered. You knew, Rachel breathed, leaning against the rail for support. You knew James was stealing from the hospital the whole time. I suspected, Lucas corrected, staring at the floor numbers counting down. The audit confirmed it. I didn't create the crime, Rachel. I just turned on the lights. He's going to prison, she whispered. My husband is going to prison. Ex-husband, I assume, Lucas said calmly. Once the assets are frozen, I imagine he won't fit your lifestyle criteria anymore. The words were soft, but they cut deeper than a scalpel. Rachel flinched. She turned to face him, searching for the man who used to drive a beat-up Honda just to buy her textbooks. Is that what you think of me? She asked, her voice cracking. That I'm just a mercenary? Lucas finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, tired, and ancient. You told me you'd rather sleep on the floor than with a janitor. You made it very clear that your affection was conditional on tax brackets. I just listened to you. I was young. Rachel pleaded, stepping closer. I was scared, Lucas. I was drowning in debt, and everyone around me was successful, and I wanted to be safe. James offered me safety. James offered you a shortcut, Lucas said. And I offered you a partnership. You chose the shortcut. The elevator dinged. Lobby level. Lucas adjusted his portfolio and stepped out. Rachel followed him, grabbing his arm. The contact sent a shockwave through her. His bicep was hard, unyielding under the wool of his suit. Lucas, wait. Please. He stopped in the middle of the busy atrium. Patients and doctors streamed around them, oblivious to the autopsy of a marriage happening in the center of the room. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, the tears finally spilling over. "I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. A horrible, arrogant mistake. I miss you. I miss who we were." Lucas looked down at her hand on his arm. He didn't shake it off, but he didn't cover it with his own. "You don't miss us, Rachel," he said quietly. "You miss being adored. You miss having someone who looked at you like you were the sun. James looks at you like a trophy, and now that the trophy is tarnished, you're lonely." "That's not true," she sobbed. "I love you. I never stopped. I got lost." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and wet, using every ounce of vulnerability she possessed. "Can't we try? You're here. I'm here. We can start over. You're the man you always wanted to be now. We match." Lucas stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. For a second, Rachel thought she saw a flicker of the old Lucas, the boy who had promised to take care of her forever. Then, he gently removed her hand from his arm. "That's the problem, Rachel," he said. "We don't match." "Why? Because of the past?" "No," Lucas said, stepping back. "Because I built this empire so I would never have to rely on anyone again. And you built yours by relying on everyone but yourself." He turned toward the automatic sliding doors, where the winter wind was waiting. "Lucas," she called out, desperate. "Where are you going?" He paused, the automatic doors sliding open, letting in the roar of the Chicago traffic and the biting cold. "Back to work," he said. "I have a contract to fulfill." He walked out into the gray afternoon. Rachel stood alone in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the hospital she ran, the title she had coveted, and the terrible, echoing silence of a heart that had finally flatlined. The winter in Chicago had turned brutal. The wind coming off the lake was no longer just cold. It was punitive. It was the final day of the Bennett transition. The biohazard trucks, branded with the sleek blue logo of Bennett Solutions, were rolling out of the St. Jude's loading bay in a disciplined convoy. The chaotic, overflowing mess of the past 3 years had been scrubbed clean. Lucas stood by his car in the executive lot, signing the final compliance manifest on a digital tablet held by the hospital's new interim administrator. Rachel watched him from the sliding glass doors of the main entrance. She wasn't wearing her white coat. She had been placed on administrative leave pending the internal investigation into James's embezzlement. The board had spared her from prison, citing her ignorance of the financial details, but they hadn't spared her reputation. She pushed open the doors and walked out into the snow. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin cashmere sweater. She didn't feel the cold. She felt numb. Lucas handed the tablet back to the administrator and turned to unlock his car, a new, black Tesla. He saw her approaching. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. He waited. "They indicted James this morning," Rachel said, her voice swallowed by the wind. 12 counts of wire fraud. They're seizing the assets, the accounts, the cars, the penthouse. "I heard," Lucas said. His voice was not unkind, just distant, like a doctor delivering a prognosis he had known was coming for a long time. "I have to move out by tomorrow," she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't have anywhere to go, Lucas. My credit is frozen because of the investigation. My friends, the people at the gala, none of them will return my calls." She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. The arrogance of the woman in the silver dress was gone. The surgeon who demanded perfection was gone. All that was left was the girl who had been afraid to be poor. "You won," she whispered. "You fixed the hospital. You exposed James. You have everything now. Are you happy?" Lucas looked at the hospital towering above them, the glass fortress where she had once felt like a queen. Then he looked at her. "Happiness wasn't the goal, Rachel," he said. "Dignity was." "I have nothing," she choked out. "I'm going to be sleeping on a mattress in a studio apartment in Rogers Park. I'm back to where I started." She reached out, her hand trembling, trying to touch the lapel of his coat. It was a reflex, a ghost of the intimacy they once shared. "Lucas, please." Just tell me you feel something. Hate. Anything. Lucas looked down at her hand. He didn't pull away this time. He gently took her fingers in his gloved hand, but there was no warmth in the grip. It was the firm, final handshake of a business deal concluding. He leaned in slightly, his voice cutting through the wind. 5 years ago, you told me you'd rather sleep on the floor than be with me, he said. He released her hand. The floor is all yours now, Rachel. He opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The electric engine hummed to life, silent and efficient. He didn't look back as he pulled out of the lot, merging into the stream of traffic, heading toward a skyline that he now helped design. Rachel stood alone in the empty parking lot until the taillights disappeared. 6 hours later, the penthouse on the Gold Coast was dark. The electricity had been cut off an hour ago. The furniture, the Italian leather sofas, the mahogany dining table, the Art Deco lamps, was gone, repossessed by the federal marshals. The only light came from the city outside, the amber glow of the street lamps filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Rachel sat in the center of the vast, empty living room. The hardwood floor was cold, hard, and unforgiving. She pulled the thin duvet she had salvaged from the guest room around her shoulders. She looked at the spot where the Christmas tree used to stand. She looked at the wall where her medical degree used to hang. It was silent. No champagne corks popping. No laughter of wealthy friends. No James bragging about stocks. And no Lucas making coffee in the kitchen, humming a song, waiting to rub her feet. She lay down. The wood pressed against her cheek. It was uncomfortable. It was cold. It was exactly what she had chosen, disguised as everything she wanted. Dr. Rachel Bennett closed her eyes, and in the silence of the empty penthouse, she finally slept on the floor.